So most of you are probably aware that our readings Sunday by Sunday are appointed in a document we call a lectionary. I don't know exactly when they were all laid out for our readings, but they go on a 3-year cycle, and we come around to the same set of readings every 3 years. And there's lots of really good things about that practice. One of the good things is that it prevents you from being held captive to my personal predilections in Scripture. I don't get to choose the readings. It helps to challenge me to have to reflect on readings that I might sooner choose not to reflect on, that I might find difficult, and so might skip over. So there's a real discipline to having a kind of appointed readings that aren't just chosen each Sunday by one person. But there are certain drawbacks to reading scriptures from the lectionary, and I think maybe we've encountered one of those drawbacks this morning, because sometimes the framers of the lectionary, of the readings, the people who choose the readings, what they do is they have chosen to edit the text. So this morning, we had Bruce read, as he was instructed, Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 to 9, and then 18 to 23, leading out that a whole middle section. And there's a problem, I think, particularly with this scripture in omitting the middle chunk, because what it does effectively is it seems to suggest that the parable and the interpretation of the parable are irrevocably connected, that they're linked together. And in fact, it's not totally clear that that's actually the case. Most scholarly opinion today, contemporary scholarly opinion, seems to suggest that verses 18 to 23, known or called, I think Bruce called it the parable explained, that most scholars today believe that the explanation is actually an addition, that it wasn't part of the original. And the belief that there's only two places, two parables in the whole of Scripture which do have an explanation attached. One is this one, the parable of the sower and the seed. The other is the parable of the wheat and tares, that's also in Matthew's gospel. And those are the only two parables that are ever given an explanation, or apparently given an explanation by Jesus. And the practice of explaining a parable seems in many ways to undercut the central point or the central thrust of a parable. Parables are like the Eastern word of koan. A parable is like a koan. It's supposed to raise questions. It's not supposed to provide answers. It's supposed to challenge you to think deeply and to ponder. It's supposed to be kind of open-ended. Explanations are more tight. They're more closed. They say, okay, here's the answer. This is the application. This is how you're intended to understand it. That doesn't tend to have been Jesus' way of teaching. But whether you want to accept that or not, the important thing, I think, is that by focusing simply, as the explanation does, on the kinds of soil, there's a tendency to miss what I think is really one of the central points of the actual parable itself. It shifts the focus. It shifts the focus away from the sower. And I think the sower in this parable is really important. And I'll come back to that in a moment. One of the other downsides of the lectionary sometimes is that you never read consistently through an entire book of the Bible. Okay, you never start at chapter 1 and read right through to the last verse of the last chapter. It's always some degree of picking and choosing. And if you look at the lectionary as it's appointed for us dealing with Matthew's gospel, you'll discover that, strangely, the whole of Matthew chapter 12 is missing. We're never instructed to read Matthew chapter 12. If you only hear the Bible or only ever read the Bible hearing it in church, you'll never read Matthew chapter 12. And if you go now and this afternoon read Matthew chapter 12, you may be just as well happy that you don't have to be subjected to Matthew chapter 12 in church, because it's a passage that is full of pain, full of suffering, full of difficulty. It's a passage that speaks of darkness, of persecution, of conflict, of uncertainty and doubt. It's a passage that gives a portrayal of a kind of life that most of us would do most of what we can to try to escape or to avoid. And I think when we face the realities of discomfort, of awkwardness, of pain and suffering in life, there's a temptation for us to be tempted to withdraw, to try to find safety, to try to shelter ourselves, to harbor our resources. And I think that's why chapter 13 starts out with this parable of the sower. We need to see this parable in the context in which it appears, which is a context of suffering and danger and risk and uncertainty and violence. And it's into that context that we have this picture of a sower. And the sower strides out into the countryside, and the sower casts the seed abroad. The sower doesn't check the soil first. The sower doesn't look for where there is rocky ground and say, "Oh, I won't sow any seed there because I know it won't take root. It won't bear fruit. I'll harbor my seed. I'll save my seed and protect it and only put it in good soil." The sower doesn't look and say, "Oh, look, there's thorny soil with weeds and growing up. I won't put any seed there because I know that it'll get choked and it won't bear fruit. It won't grow into the fullness that it was intended and that I sowed it for." The sower in this parable is really absolutely reckless in his sowing of the seed. The sower casts the seed absolutely without consideration for where it may fall. Now, obviously, we need to be sensible. We don't sow our seed in the ocean. The sower doesn't throw the seed just absolutely anywhere. But nor is the sower unnecessarily cautious about where he allows that seed to fall. And I think that's a really important caution for all of us, especially at this time. Yes, we need to be careful. Yes, we need to be responsible and sensible about our health and especially about the health of other people, those who are most vulnerable at this time. But we also need to be aware of the challenge of this time, to continue to find ways to cast our seed, to continue to find ways to reach out, to continue to find ways to connect. It means taking risk. And, lots of us are risk averse. It means trying new things. I mean, goodness knows, who would have thought 4 months ago that I'd be sitting in my front hall at home talking to a laptop on Sunday morning? It's absurd. But it's what we need to do right now. And when the time comes, as we hope and trust it will, when the time comes for us to make our way back into the building on the corner of Neil and Easttown, even if it's only 40 of us at a time, and even if we're not able to sing, and even if we can only have bread and it has to be given by someone wearing a mask and from behind a plexiglass shield, and even if it means we have to register to come to church, even if it means we have to go in one door and out a different door, all those things, they're all things that we need to try, we need to work on. We need to find ways together that we can be sowers. You know, it's this image of the sower. So often when this parable is taken, and I think the explanation reinforces the idea that it's all about the soil and it's all about the seed, but it's really about the sower. And we are called to be sowers. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6, Paul says, the point is this: the one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And the one who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Bountifully means generously. Bountifully means that we are willing to let go of our seed and allow it to fall where it may. This parable is really it's a caution against worrying about outcomes. It's a caution against being overly concerned with productivity. The point of this parable is to focus us on the sower that we are called to be, and the sower who has graciously sowed abundant seed in our lives and in our hearts. We all know now, because we've seen the video, that Shannon is a great gardener and has amazing raspberries. But Shannon said something really important in her video. She called us to recognize the challenge to produce fruit. And I don't know if you realize that Shannon is actually a better Greek scholar than the translators of the New Revised Standard Version. It's true. The parable ends in the NRSV saying, other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain. I don't know why they did that. The word's not grain. The Greek word, as Shannon obviously knows, is karpos. And karpos is always fruit. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth fruit. And I think Shannon's connection of fruit to the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, self-control, all those things, those are the fruit that the Spirit desires to bring into our lives. But Shannon pointed out that fruit comes not because of our work. That fruit comes because of God's presence inside of us. The sower lives in your heart. The sower has a dwelling place at the heart of your being. And the sower desires to cast the seed of your being abroad in the world. And the sower is less concerned about how productive it'll be, where it will fall, what it will produce. The sower simply desires us to be willing to let go. You know, the sower has a handful of seed and says, you know, this is the best seed there is, and I'm going to protect this seed. I'm going to look after this seed. I'm going to make sure nobody ever steals a single grain of my seed. I'm going to make sure that this seed is always safe and always preserved. How much fruit is there going to be? The seed will eventually sprout, rot, and die. In order for that seed to produce fruit, it has to be released. And that's really the challenge of this parable. It's the challenge of this time, of our willingness to let go of our need to be in control, our willingness to let go of our need for things to be as they used to be, and our willingness to risk with the sower and launch out into the field of life and allow our seed to fall into the ground, whatever the ground may be like, and those bits that are able to produce fruit and benefit to all of the world. And now Yvette is going to lead us in prayer. So you need